So maybe you've heard about the ACA qualification. Maybe you've even secured a training contract and started sitting your certificate level exams, but you don't really know what to expect. You've heard the stories about the exams being very tough and how a lot of people are struggling to balance it with work and keep up with their hobbies. And these are all very valid concerns, and definitely ones I had 3 years ago when I started my training contract. But 3 years later, very recently, I qualified as a chartered accountant, having passed all the exams first time. And this video is aimed at myself when I was just getting started 3 years ago. And I really hope it helps someone who is very new to this journey and who's also just getting started themselves. So this is a picture of me I took a couple years ago in my apartment when I was just studying away, pretty much where I got all my exams done from that space there. And it was an incredibly tough journey, but I'm so glad I stuck with it. I'm so glad I stuck it out. So yeah, these are the 5 tips that I give myself when I was just getting started. So the first one is you don't actually need to be a maths genius to pass these exams. I feel like when people say accounting and accounting exams and becoming a chartered accountant, you pretty much automatically think, right, they're an absolute maths wizard, they're a genius at maths, they're great. But in truth, I was never great at maths growing up, right? I didn't enjoy it. I dropped it at A level because I struggled with it. And I really avoided it as much as I could growing up. And here I was entering a profession known, for maths, for numbers. However, as I said, I still managed to pass all the exams first time. I got a 98% exam score in one of the professional level exams, which is very numbers heavy. And looking back at it, maths obviously played a big part, but there's so much more to these exams than just being able to add up numbers. And really, I'd argue this is true for the entire accounting profession as a whole. Because you're training to be a business advisor. You're not just training to be someone that can, add up numbers and count beans, as they call it. You're really training to advise businesses on growth and how to actually succeed, pretty much, aren't you? So your ability to actually think critically is far more valuable than your maths ability. Now, obviously, there's a lot of numbers in these exams. I'm not going to deny that. You need to know Excel, you need to know formulas, you need to know, taking percentages, all that kind of stuff. But I'd really argue that it isn't the forefront of the exams. It's not a precursor to succeeding in them. And you really don't need to be a maths whiz, you really don't need to be great at maths to pass these exams. There's a lot more to it than that. So the second tip I give is to sit your exams strategically. Now, I appreciate not everyone has this luxury. A lot of the bigger firms have a very structured layout to how the people sit exams. But at my firm where I trained, I was pretty lucky to have full reign over which exams I sat and when I sat them. And I managed to get them all done in 3 years. But looking back at it, I didn't really have much of a plan and a layout to the order I sat the exams in. It was fairly random. But if I was to start 3 years ago, then I have a pretty good idea of which ones I'd sit and when. And it would pretty much be this. So maybe you want to screenshot this if you are just getting started and you have this luxury. So, assuming you have a September start date, which is when a lot of graduate schemes seem to start, and you're an absolute study machine, this is the order I would sit the exams in. So, very soon after starting, I would do accounting, and this isn't the order I sat my exams in. This is just the ones I would do, but it's fairly similar to the order that I actually did mine in. But I would start with accounting pretty soon after starting a training contract because I really think, this is the absolute foundation of the exam. And honestly, this is probably one of the hardest exams because when you're new to accounting, unless you've done it at uni or anything like that, you pretty much have no idea about debits and credits and, receivables and payables and all these kind of intricacies and terminologies that you need to know to pass this exam. But I really would sit this one first because it's going to give you a foundation to what accounting actually is and, really boil it down to its roots. So sit this one first. I then do law and business technology and finance together not long after. Now, to be honest, I would say these are probably the easiest two exams, even though law was the one I actually did worst on in the entire levels. It was the one I scored the worst on. But I really don't think these exams take too much time in terms of preparation compared to the other ones. So I'd argue sit these together about a month or so after doing accounting. And then management information. Now, again, I found this one really hard. I passed it first time, but I did find it a challenging exam. So I would sit this one by itself just because it takes quite a lot of brain power, and you're going to need at least a month or two just to wrap your head around the concepts and get some practice in. And then I would do principles of tax and assurance together. Now, principles of tax is one of the harder ones, I'd say, at the certificate level after management information. But assurance, again, if you're coming from an audit background, it's not an awful exam to do. You can pass it with a few weeks of studying, definitely. But yeah, principles of tax, I found that one quite tough. And yeah, I would sit these ones together as well. I'd sit them in March ideally. So if you're starting September, you're bashing them out up until about March, and you should get your certificates done by about that time. I think I did all mine in about 8 months or 9 months from when I got started. But I definitely think I could have condensed it down if I, had this roadmap and had this plan. And the reason why I'd sit these two in March is because I'd then do the professional level audit and assurance and tax compliance together in June. Now, like I said, this is just personal preference, but these two exams here, the principles of tax and assurance, really feed into these ones here, the audit and assurance and tax compliance. And tax compliance is a precursor into business planning taxation. A lot of the concepts and things you need to know at this exam will tie into BPT. So I would definitely sit this one before BPT if you can. I wouldn't sit them together, even though there is a lot of overlap. They're still very different exams in terms of what you actually have to do and how you have to portray your answers. But I would sit this one first and this one second, because these two are very much a precursor to these two. Now, I sat assurance in November 22, I want to say. And then I sat audit and assurance pretty much a month or less than a month after I sat assurance. And I found there was a lot of crossovers between the two. So, yeah, like I said, I'd sit them two close together. And the same with principles of tax and tax compliance. I sat this one second, I think. I did accounting and then I did principles of tax after. And by the time I got around to tax compliance, I realized there was a lot of crossovers, but again, a lot of the rules had changed by then, and I'd forgotten a lot of the stuff I'd learned doing the principles of tax exams. So ideally, sit these two as close together as possible. I then do BST, so business strategy and technology. I think this is probably one of the lighter exams in terms of the professional levels. So I'd sit that one with BPT, which is, in my opinion, the hardest at the professional level. So potentially the easiest and the hardest will work quite well together, because a lot more of your time is going to go into BPT than BST, in my opinion. So sitting them together is quite good. With financial management, I didn't really find there to be much crossover with any certificate level exams. So it's a lot of new concepts that you need to learn for this exam, but it's not overly difficult, I would say. There's just quite a bit to learn and get your head around, but it's one of the interesting ones, in my opinion. And I would sit this one by itself. So if you're sitting this in June, you're sitting these in September. I'd then do this in December, a few months later. And then financial accounting and reporting. It does build on accounting, but it is a lot more in depth and a lot harder, in my opinion. Well, in a lot of people's opinion, than just the standard accounting. So again, I would give this one the respect it needs and sit this one by itself. And this is one I did really well on. I got 98% in this one. I'm not really too sure how. But yeah, I would sit this one by itself. And then corporate reporting pretty much just builds on FAR, but adds in a lot more stuff about groups and the consolidation. So again, I would sit this one by itself away from SBM and case study, because this one is an absolute beast of an exam and you need to give it the respect and the time it needs. But like I said, a lot of the concepts in here do build on FAR. So ideally, I'd sit FAR in March and then I go to sit corporate reporting in July. So a few months later, where you can just learn all the new skills. But I promise you, there's a lot of crossover between these two. So sit these two, if you can, as close together as possible. And then SBM and case study. SBM, it sort of builds on BST, but it is still a fairly nuanced exam, and I'd say it's still fairly different. But again, compared to corporate reporting, in my personal opinion, it is a lot more tame and not as difficult as corporate reporting. So this is the order I sat mine in. Actually, I did CR in July, and then I did SBM and case study together in November. And case study, again, it's nothing like any of the other exams. It would take me a whole video itself just to explain how that one works. But yeah, I would sit these two together because there is a bit of overlap between SBM and case study. So if you can, sit these two together. And yeah, that's the order I would sit them in if I could go back. And if you have the choice when you're just getting started, this is what I would do. So all right, next up, I'm going to give you just 3 very quick fire tips to finish off the video. But my first one, and probably the biggest one, is to actually finish the exams. Now, I really think that the best way to pass these exams is to finish them. You don't need to focus on getting everything right because ultimately you only need 50 or 55% to pass. And you're better off doing good on 5 questions and getting them all done than absolutely trying to nail 3 questions and leaving out 1 or 2 at the end. Like, I really think finishing the exams and time management should be your absolute number 1 priority. And I would argue it's the best way to give yourself a chance of succeeding, because there's a lot of easy marks to pick up in the questions. And just by attempting them, you are going to start picking up marks. So yeah, attempt every single question and give yourself that best chance of success. My next tip is the workings beat the numbers. Now, I feel like a lot of people, myself included, when I just got started, I focus and stress so much on getting the right number in the right place. And while it does matter getting the right number, if you don't get the right number, but you link to your workings and you sort of show your thought process and how you actually went about finding that number, you are going to pick up a lot of marks just for doing that. Because if the examiner can see and sort of follow along what you're trying to do, you are going to pick up marks for doing that. And it's going to be a lot more worth your time than really trying to stress about getting the exact right number to the right decimal point, than actually attempting it and getting somewhere close or getting just a figure and showing exactly how you got to that figure, especially for exams like FAR. I definitely didn't get all the right figures, but I still managed to get 98% because I just linked to my workings and I showed what I did, and I just showed the nuanced side between my workings and what I was trying to do and how it linked into that question. So really don't think it matters too much about getting the exact right number. Focus on getting the workings right and getting them nailed down. And my last tip is to, as best as you can, avoid waffling. So on the written exams, you really need to keep your points concise. And remember that term P from primary school, point, evidence, explanation. It literally comes into these exams, right? You need to state your point to evidence either in the question or link to an accounting standard, and then give an explanation of how it works and link it back to the question. So literally all that is just point, evidence, explanation, move on to the next point, do the same old thing over and over again, and you will pick up marks rather than, picking a point, trying to just waffle on about that point and not giving yourself the breadth to answer and give as many points as you can. You're just going too deep into one point. I really think there's more value in keeping things concise, keeping it down to the paragraphs, and really structuring your paragraphs and your points to the T. So this is the end of the video. I really hope it was helpful. If you did find it helpful, then I'd really appreciate a subscribe. I'm really orienting my account towards helping accountants excel, is something I'm passionate about. I find it interesting. So yeah, if you want to follow along that journey, then please feel free to subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.